Welcome to another program that's sponsored by the Dummerston Conservation Commission and the Bonneville Environmental Education Center. This is Patti Smith, and she's going to be talking about beavers and...
No.
She's talking about porcupines.
I'm doing the wrong show. Did you all come to hear about beavers?
I'm not quite on my game, because you're all friends, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, this is Patty's book. We have them out there, and we appreciate all the donations that people have made. It helps us to keep this going. We kind of operate on a shoestring. Nobody gives us money to do these things, so I'm really glad you came. And Patty, go ahead.
Well, I've got a bunch of notes here. Let's see. 2 years ago, I think it was, I did a very ambitious presentation here, same venue, and it was all the rodents of Vermont, all 18 of them in one evening. I love rodents, and there are so many cute little rodents that nobody knows about and appreciates. But I thought that was very ambitious, and it took a lot of work to get through all 18 rodents. Last year, we upped the ante, and I did all the mammals of Vermont. 48 species. How many of you were here? Oh, see, no one would come back after. I say, I'm going to do just porcupines, and you know how hard it was to put this together? How much material I had to weed out? Just porcupines, and not only just porcupines, it's really just 2 porcupines. And mostly 1 porcupine. Same. What I knew of porcupines is what most of us know of porcupines, which is that butt back there in a crack in the rock, or a lump way up in a tree, until I went for a walk. We'll start with a walk with a fellow named Walter Schwartz, who some of you may know. Walter Schwartz, a local guy, and his daughter Mary came out to visit my beaver friends, and he asked me a question that was a very good question. So, you've been hanging out with these beavers for 5 years now. What are you going to study next? And I said, I think porcupines. And when I got home, there was a porcupine in the apple tree in my backyard. And that is when my porcupine adventure commenced. The Fretful Porpentine comes from a Shakespeare quote, which really intrigued me when I discovered it many years ago in Hamlet. A tale unfold whose lightest word would cause thy knotted and combined locks to part, and each particular hair to stand on end, like quills upon the fretful porpentine. And this is when he's talking about seeing his father, the ghost, I think. I don't really remember the context, but what I remember is being really puzzled. What does William Shakespeare know about porcupines? There aren't any porcupines in England. There are hardly any porcupines in Europe, and certainly not Northern Europe. And at the time he wrote Hamlet, let's see, England would have been establishing a failed colony in Virginia. So what do they know of the North American porcupine either? But still, porcupines are kind of fretful, and porpentines, I would think, would be even more fretful. So we begin at the beginning of my story with Fretful, who was eating the apples in these trees in my backyard one day, and when all the apples in the trees were gone, he was strolling around underneath them one day, just gathering the drops and eating them. So I did what I do and went out and sat down nearby and rolled him an apple. And he strolled up and started eating it, and then he strolled up a little closer and ate the one that was closer. And I encourage you to enjoy the slurping noises too. Yeah, spit out the peels. Now, note that marvelous dexterity with those long claws clamping the apple to the pads of his feet. And when he's done with an apple, what you have left are some peels and a core. He is way better at cleaning off an apple than anybody else. Here comes the peel. Yeah. So that was something I learned. And of course, when we think about porcupines, the first thing most of us think about are quills, especially when there's a porcupine sitting within a foot of you eating an apple. I was very aware of the quills. There are about 30,000 of them. But on a winter-coated porcupine, or this summer-coated baby porcupine, you don't see the quills in all of that really thick, warm fur. They have very thick coats until you get around to the backside. And then you can see the quills. So I have learned a lot about porcupines also from the porcupine expert. His name is Aldous Rose, and he wrote the book on porcupines. If anyone is interested in having the ultimate porcupine resource, I recommend his book, The North American Porcupine, which is not just jam-packed full of his research, but also his stories of the porcupines he studied in the Catskills for many years. And what I learned from Aldous Rose about quills is that they don't come out unless the porcupine is really alarmed. Unless the porcupine has got those quills in the erect, alarmed position, they just sort of float in the skin. You can push against them, and they pretty much don't come out. Pretty much, I say, I've had lots of porcupine quills in my clothing this summer, and all right, I'm not sure if the porcupine was alarmed or not. Another interesting feature about porcupine quills is the arrangement of the quills. This is Fretful walking away, and let's see if we can get some arrow here. This portion of a porcupine's back is covered with these little short black quills, and there's no hair on that part of the back. And what there are instead are sebaceous glands that secrete a very fragrant oil. And Aldous thinks this is part of a porcupine's warning system. So when the porcupine is alarmed, all these stiff little black quills go up and wick up the oil. So an alarmed porcupine has a very interesting piney fragrance. And I noticed that about Fretful that first day he was sitting there right next to me. I also noticed his wonderful long guard hairs. I especially like these ones in the sun here. They just sort of bounced and look like fancy head ornaments. But you can imagine with all these long guard hairs all over that he's just constantly gathering tactile information about his environment. So Fretful, yes, we had a couple of days where he would come up and sit next to me and eat apples. And then I'll read to you from the column that I wrote the day that we had our first really great experience together. Very surprising. This is where I learned that Fretful is a most unusual porcupine. So Fretful and I had another short visit the following evening, and then for several nights I did not see him. The apple crop was finally finished. This evening, however, I spotted him again, and when he noticed me, he headed up the path in my direction. I handed him an apple, and he sat down beside me to eat. I didn't smell his special perfume. He must have been calm. When he had eaten his fill, about an hour and 3 apples later, they eat very slowly, he poked around some more and then headed into the woods, leaving behind a small pile of parings and precisely excised cores. I invite you to join me at this point in the narrative. As I lie in the grass in the growing dark, typing these words on my laptop, I hear Fretful return from the woods. He walks past me and comes around to face me. I would be crazy to reach my nose toward him, I think, and surprisingly I don't. Instead, Fretful rises on his hind legs, places a forepaw on my shoulder, and reaches his face forward to mine. His whiskery nose tickles my face for several seconds, and then, satisfied that all has been said and done, Fretful returns to the woods. And what is a person to do after receiving such a blessing? I had been taken into the confidence of the porpentine Fretful, and the night was exalted. So I didn't know. I had certainly no expectation that a porcupine would behave that way, but I have since learned that most porcupines don't. He is an unusual guy. And he was just as happy now that he trusted me to say hello to pretty much anybody, so it it's a good thing, like I say, that all my friends and neighbors love porcupines. And he was just unflappable. I would sometimes have groups of screaming kids all vying for his attention, and I was just waiting for him to say, oh, this is enough, and storm away. But he was so patient. And yes, he eventually would crawl up and sit on someone's lap if it offered the proper enticement. Fretful porcupine. And that fall, about a month later, I don't have pictures of this because it was very dark when it occurred, but I was walking home from visiting some beavers and had the experience that someone like me always wants to have your whole life. You want to walk around in the woods and see an animal and say, oh, hello, George. And they say, oh, it's you, is it? And they come over and say hello. So I'm walking in the woods at night, and there are actually 2 porcupines. And I say, I'm about 1/3 of a mile from my house and don't really know where Fretful is, but it is fall, and it is porcupine mating season. So I try my little trick. As the porcupines scuttle off into the bushes, I say, hello, Fretful, and sure enough, one of them stops and turns around and comes right over. And soon got sick of me and the goat. I was hiking around with the goat, and he went up the tree after his girlfriend, and they hung around up in the tree together for quite a while, behaving very amicably, so not typical of porcupine mating behavior. I'm guessing that they'd taken care of all the stressful stuff and were just relaxing afterwards. So yes, dear Fretful. So we had a very nice fall together, but porcupines do have other things to do, and he disappeared a couple nights before Tropical Storm or Hurricane Sandy, I guess it was. Remember Hurricane Sandy came through? We didn't really have much here, but some rain and some really high wind, but it's a pretty nasty night. And I didn't know where Fretful was, so sure enough, I hear some thumping around out there partway through the night, and I go out, and there's this thing out there. What is this? This is not Fretful, this is Fluffy. And this is not the same night. Fluffy came back on several occasions once she discovered there were apples there, but I think what really brought her there, and this is something I've been learning about porcupines, I don't have a lot of evidence yet, but it seems like when young porcupines are dispersing, they are attracted to areas frequented by other porcupines. So Fluffy I got to know, but she never came up to me and wanted to be friendly the way Fretful was. Fluffy, isn't she cute? And so this is now November, and Fretful has been eating lots and lots of acorns. I get him on the scale to see what he weighs at his peak before he goes off to his winter den. And that scale says 19 pounds, almost 19 pounds. It's a pretty good size, not gigantic, but for a Marlboro porcupine, it's pretty good. And he started to not come around so often, and I found him in some ledges nearby, and then eventually he disappeared from those ledges. And I searched high and low, all the known porcupine dens, but finally I realized, okay, I just have to wait until it snows so I can find good porcupine tracking potential and locate all the porcupines. So I started going to all the known porcupine areas. Oh, it's lots of fun because porcupines just love these crazy, steep, ledgy places. And I, sure enough, started to find lots of porcupine dens, and I would go up and say hello to all the porcupines inside, and none of them would say hello back. But I left them acorns and apples anyway. So just nice territory. And you can see this. So just a little bit about porcupine behavior and biology in winter. They spend lots of time in these very sheltered dens, very bare floors though, and they eat just a few things that are very hard to digest. The inner bark of trees, you can see these little saplings in the foreground have been stripped. And in my neighborhood, they also mostly eat hemlock. twigs and needles, and this is what a tree looks like that a porcupine's been feeding in, what the underside looks like. So anyway, my efforts to locate Fretful, I finally started diagramming all the places I'd checked and all the places I haven't checked, and by now I found, maybe 8, 9, 10. By the end of the winter, I had found 17 different porcupines. And let's see, the circles are, I think, a kilometer diameter, so in this 2-kilometer range. This is where I was searching. And yep, gradually got to know the different porcupines in the different dens. And visited them all repeatedly. This one would come out sometimes, but the one would come very close. Oh, didn't she choke? Yes. And I even found Fluffy. Fluffy was living underneath a little shack in the woods not very far from my house. I visited Fluffy a lot. Fluffy would come out and sit near me, but with, some anxiety and never wanted to come over afterwards and say, "Hi, how you doing?" No. But she was very cute. And this guy I thought was particularly handsome. Well, from the back, that's all I ever saw of him. And I especially wanted to get to know a porcupine that lived up near where I saw Fretful and that other porcupine, thinking that, that might be Fretful's mate, and maybe if I get to know her next spring, I'll get to know baby porcupines. But alas, I only encountered her in the winter. I never saw her again in the summer. This little porcupine I had high hopes for. I called her Mimi, I don't know why. Couldn't be helped. She lived in a really spectacular perch. It was really hard to get up to her den. But one day I went there and she didn't, I left some acorns and apples and went away and came back a minute later, and she'd gone down and was eating them when I was pretty close. So I said, okay, this is a porcupine that might be good to get to know. And I came back the next time and she just stayed right where she was and didn't move. So I said, this is definitely going to be a trusting porcupine. But when I came back again the next day, we're going to have to zoom in here. This is what her den looks like. What a crazy place to live, on an iceberg. So zoom in here, and what I saw right up here, you can see this tuft of quills and furs sticking up out of the ice. She didn't move that last time because she couldn't move. She was frozen into the ice. Oh, poor Mimi. So I went back, of course, to check on her at the next day, and there she was, and she couldn't move again. So I took out an ice scraper that I had in my pack and scraped away the ice underneath her tail, which was where she was stuck, and she couldn't move again. And she seemed pretty relaxed about the whole process, but you can imagine she decided not to stay in that den. So she moved away, and I didn't know for sure where she went after that. Porcupine number 10 turned out to be this guy. And this is Fretful. I didn't realize it at first. First I went there on a cold night, just out skiing, and found a new porcupine trail that led to a little tiny root mass that was covered in snow, and sure enough, yep, there was a porcupine inside. I could see he didn't raise his quills when I arrived, so I said, maybe it's Fretful. But he didn't come out either, so I said, all right, probably not Fretful. When I finally went back sometime in February or March, he came right out and demonstrated that yes, it was Fretful. He looks pretty different though with all his winter coat. He's a very fuzzy guy. So I had lots of fun visiting with Fretful after that, bringing him apples and acorns. It was a bit of a trek to get out to his winter den. Yes, some other people came out and enjoyed his company out there. But we'll just, I guess we'll start from here. So when the snow melts, porcupines leave their dens and just disperse to gather their spring foods. And often they feed on sugar maple. They're very fussy. They eat only 2 or 3 plants per season, and it all depends on the levels of the chemicals in each plant. Their digestive systems are just so finely honed. They're the only mammal I know that's at all like that. But one day a neighbor called and said, you know, there was a porcupine in our yard a couple days ago. Maybe it was Fretful. So I headed through the woods down toward their house and heard a stick snap and looked around, and there was a porcupine. And I said, is that you, Fretful? And he said, and came right over and was very happy to have an apple. And so we recommenced our porcupine studies there. You can see him using the computer as a seat while he eats an apple. And I should say that Fretful has helped me contribute some very important observations to the porcupine literature. Not that they've been published yet, but I'm sure they will be. For example, most baby mammals, or mammals that I know of, love to be sleeping someplace comfortable. They like to be all covered up. They like a nice soft bed. That first day I discovered Fretful out there, I realized porcupines are different. There were plenty of cozy places he could have snuggled up on the forest floor there, but no, he wants to find the most uncomfortable place possible. And you've seen porcupines sleeping in weird places like this. I just can't imagine what possesses them to seek the most extreme discomfort for sleeping. Fretful also would sleep this summer on this long, skinny, horizontal branch. Just sleep on a branch. It made no sense. He would be there for hours and hours. So that is, I think, a very important observation that you will read about it in Nature next year. Once I fully comprehend the mechanism. And the second thing that Fretful taught me about, now trackers that I know of know that porcupines eat subterranean fungi. So when I was just talking to Aldous Rose, author of the North American Porcupine, about some of my observations with Fretful, he said, porcupines eat subterranean fungi? And I said, well, yes, of course they do. Everyone knows that. And he said, no, I don't think so. So this is what they look like. These little, some people call them false truffles, but they're a bunch of different kinds. This is the fruiting body of this mushroom, and it's always underground. That's what they look like. Flying squirrels love to eat them. Lots of animals love to eat them. Porcupines love to eat them. At least in my neighborhood, maybe not in Catskills. So that weekend, Fretful was only too happy to show me how porcupines dig up and eat these false truffles. Aldous Rose was not, he said, okay, yeah, that's good, but I can't really tell what he's eating there. In order to document this for the literature, you need to find the spores, get a picture of the spores, get a picture of the spores in the porcupine poop. So, yeah, well, I did that. I probably won't do much with it. But it turns out porcupines stopped eating those in the early summer, so I didn't get to document that any further. Then Fretful switches to this very other strange food source. He eats milkweed. And when I saw the bent-over milkweed plants in my yard, I knew Fretful had returned to my backyard. Yep, typical signs of porcupine feeding on milkweed. They don't eat that mid-vein part, only the succulent leaf parts. Milkweeds contain very toxic cardioglycosides. And we all know that monarch caterpillars can eat them, and the butterflies then become poisonous. Mammals are not supposed to be able to eat large quantities of milkweed. So I don't know what it is that enables him to do that. And Aldous Rose doesn't either. But yes, he does like milkweed. Let's see, we got a little demonstration of porcupine eating milkweed.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. And once he's done eating, he likes to hang around and see what's going on. I'm trying to get him onto the scale again. He's not too interested. he was just so curious about people. The other thing I discovered about porcupines that summer, this is July 4th, it was over 90 degrees. I could not get him to move. He was up in this apple tree, and you can see all his legs just hanging down. Can you imagine wearing that black coat and all those quills on a day that's 90 degrees? Occasionally I would see him on hot weather lying on rocks too. So trying to keep cool, so don't move much and get plenty of ventilation or find a cold rock. So sometime late summer, early fall, Fretful disappeared, and I say, okay, what's he eating now? Maybe it's a good year for beech nuts, because everybody eats beech nuts in the fall. So I went looking in all the places I knew Fretful frequented and looked for signs of porcupines eating beech nuts, and I couldn't find any. So I decided to take a hike up to an area that I know bears and porcupines and everybody really focuses on when they're feeding on acorns. And Zoot came along because it was a nice day for a walk, and she likes to go for walks. And let's see, I might read to you some of this from the article I wrote about it. Oh, I might. Okay, so once at the top of Beech Knoll, I could hear someone raking leaves. I decided to do a wide circle around the sound with the hope of seeing the mystery raker. As I maneuvered among the beeches, my notion of what porcupines feeding in beeches would look like was reinforced. You can see up there in the top of those beech trees a bunch of hanging dead branches. This is not a very good picture, but they'll go up there and nip off the branches and drop them just like bears do, only bears break them off. And on the ground, you can see here, this was not ripped off, it was nipped off by sharp rodent teeth. So, overhead, more branches dangled in strange places, hung up in their descent. I couldn't move quietly in the litter of dry leaves, but whoever was raking continued undeterred as Goat and I made our noisy approach. And this is what the pattern of leaves look like, disturbed underneath this beech forest. You can see, I think, the patches where there are fresh new leaves that have been raked away from the patches of old dead leaves underneath. Sure enough, at the sonic center, we located Porcupine, nose to the ground, sweeping leaves aside with its paws. Not wanting to startle the creature, I announced my presence from a distance of about 30 feet. The porcupine looked up and sniffed the air in my direction. He looked like Fretful, but surely Fretful would not be so far from his known domain. Fretful, I asked. The porcupine waded eagerly toward me, humming an affirmative response. We had a very nice time up there in the beech grove. Zoot took a nap, and Fretful ate an apple, and then some acorns, and finally he went back to looking for beech nuts, and I decided I would look underneath the leaf litter too and see how many I could find, and they were really pretty easy to find, so it was a good beech nut year. And here, Fretful will demonstrate how porcupines look for beech nuts. So these are such an important source of fall food for all kinds of wildlife, especially in Marlborough where we don't have many oaks. Great acorn year though this year, huh? So the bears should be happy with the acorns. And the porcupines too, just not in Marlborough. So after finding Fretful up there, I assumed he was going to stay there and keep eating acorns, or beech nuts rather, but I couldn't find him again. And it wasn't until December that I found him back in the early den where I found him the winter before. And this is how porcupines move. They take a few steps and they stop to listen with one front foot raised. So this would be a really wonderful winter because Fretful decided to stay right there. And it was a long, cold winter this last winter. I'm sure you all remember it was a nice, proper, cold Vermont winter for once. But I felt really sorry for all the poor creatures enduring those cold temperatures night after night after night. But look at that nice thick coat he has, and he lives down in this dark little cozy cave. And he had apples and acorns, and of course, it was only about 2/10 of a mile from my house, and once I visited him out there, he said, "Oh, I remember where the good food is." And we had such a wonderful winter last winter. He arrived at my house starting December 20th, I think he missed maybe 4 nights all winter. So here's a little video footage of Fretful arriving. And again, it's slow because he takes a few steps and stops to look around. But this is something that I think is curious about wildlife. Oh, it's you. Okay, I just have to call him. Now we're going to turn down the volume because this can get pretty obnoxious. One reason that some people are reluctant to feed animals is that they feel like, oh, the animals will then become addicted to this source of human food, but it depends on the species. And with most of the animals that I have known and deal with as a wildlife rehabilitator and just in the woods, sure, it's like the birds that come to your feeder. They like to come for their treats, but then they immediately turn around and go on to forage on the things that they normally forage on. Okay, he's figured out that I'm over here now, so he's not going to go straight to the house. Oh. Hi, Fretful. Don't you love all those whiskers? Partway through the winter, he moved to another den that was nearby, right under the root ball of this tree that fell. So right in there, nice cozy spot. There's Fretful's prickly rear end. And I just had to include this nice picture of the bottom of Fretful's feet because this is what you notice when you're tracking porcupines and you have ideal tracking conditions. See that nice pebbly surface? Helps him climb. And in a great print in the snow, you can see that same pebbly surface. There it is. So, another thing that I notice as someone who spends lots of time in the woods in the winter tracking animals is after a deep snow, nothing moves for a few days. Even the snowshoe hares hold up to some extent. Everyone that is except the porcupines. It doesn't matter how deep the snow is or what the heck the snow is doing, they're just completely oblivious to environmental concerns, and off they go in the deep snow. And I feel kind of sorry for Fretful. Alicia, who's in the back there, remembers Fretful arriving one very snowy day in a snowstorm, and what a beautiful sight to see that black porcupine, the snow flying up as he approaches. So I decided to do some calculations to figure out how well porcupine, well, I'll back up first. Because that night that Fretful arrived after this big snowstorm, I said, I'm going to do him a big favor. I'm going to put on my snowshoes when he's ready to go, and I'm going to stomp a trail for him back to his house. So I notice he's getting ready to go, and he lets you know he's ready to go. I put on the big snowshoes, I head out into the snow, and I'm just floundering. I'm having a really hard time moving. Fretful cruises right past me, swims on by, and it really did seem like he was swimming. It was just ridiculous. So I failed in my attempt, but I realized then that I don't really need to do that. So I also, some of you may have read the column I wrote on flotation devices, where I decided to measure the size of the feet of various animals and get their weights and determine how well on a spectrum they are going to be able to hold themselves up on snow. So I measured Fretful's feet and his weight, and he got a score of, I forget, 81 something per centimeter. So we'll just call him an 81. And that put him sort of better than, oh, I can't even remember. But the animal you want to compare any snow-moving animal to is the snowshoe hare, which is the ultimate champ. They have got these gigantic feet and they weigh almost nothing. And Fretful was nowhere near snowshoe hare until I realized that sometimes when porcupines walk in the snow, they don't just use their feet to hold themselves up, they also use their tails. Look at that tail drag. So I got real clever and measured Fretful's feet and his tail and redid my calculations, and he came out better than the snowshoe hare. But just as a point of interest, I don't really think it should be taken seriously, because you can also see here that he doesn't use his tail when he's walking in the snow, unless the snow is really deep or his footing feels insecure. He thinks he's going to go down through. But porcupines do have completely astonishing tails. We'll see some more of that in a minute. Okay. So in January, I started to worry about Fretful because his appetite was dropping off and he was getting kind of skinny. So I wasn't sure how well he was doing. Then finally in March, he was out in the woodshed one morning. He hadn't gone home. He was out there making terrible, terrible noises. I was sure he was dreadfully injured, and managed to take him to Ron Speck to get him looked at. And how do you examine a porcupine? Well, you have to put a gas mask over their little snout and put him to sleep. And the only thing he found, aside from some quills impaled in his tail, was an abscess that had already burst, so nothing really majorly wrong. But I kept him in the infirmary here for about a week because he was still acting really strange and cussing at anyone that came near him, and I thought he might still be in pain, maybe a broken hip, but I figured out in the course of following his tracks that he'd actually had a battle with another porcupine, Big East. And also, while Dr. Speck had him sleeping away there, we took a look at his teeth and found that he really had teeth worn down to the gums, so he was a very old porcupine. And this would explain his weight loss, because what do porcupines eat in the winter? They eat woody material. And but finally, I had a day when I had nothing to do. I could follow Fretful and realized that he was just not happy and needed to be out in his Fretful world. So now it's April 6th, and it's a beautiful, warm day. The season has changed. It's still snowy, but you can see things are melting. So I follow him around for the day, and he is just full of energy, walking, sniffing everything. This is the shed where Fluffy lived, and it's not too far from where he denned up, so he spent some time sniffing around there, walking, sniffing. And finally I had to go home and feed some baby squirrels and lost track of him. But the neighbors called and reported that he had been in their yard, and I said, he's taking a shortcut. He's headed back to my house. I'll go look for him there. And when I get to my house, whoops, I find a porcupine there, yes, a nice porcupine, but it's Big East.
Oh.
So he's been waiting all these days for Fretful to come back out of the house. And he's meanwhile been scent marking all of Fretful's former range. And Fretful has been evicted. The next day I went out to see if Fretful ate any of the apples and acorns I left at that little shed out in the woods, and there was a porcupine there, but it was Big East. So he was definitely making sure that that Fretful loser guy was staying away. So I was really concerned at that point. I thought, oh, this poor old guy, he hasn't eaten. It's going to be a month before there's anything soft that he can digest, and I'm probably never going to see Fretful again. Poor old Fretful. But I didn't have time to go looking for him very much, because by then I had 4 squirrels, and soon I had 12 squirrels, and 20 squirrels. And one day my phone rang, and I said, oh no, not more squirrels. I can't possibly take any more squirrels. And this woman said, hi, my daughter is driving from Rupert to someplace in Massachusetts, and she just saw a porcupine get hit by a car. And the porcupine gave birth as it was dying. So, enter Dandelion. I managed to get some colostrum and met up with this woman, so Dandelion's a few hours old here, and she's saying, yuck, I'm supposed to drink from that thing? It's not warm and fuzzy. So this is Dandelion at 2 days old. Porcupines, as you can see, are born nice and furry. They do have little quills in there, though. And at day 2, they just sort of toddle around, just barely. She's not particularly highly competent. She's not going to run away from a wolf. But she does have those quills in there. So mother porcupines actually leave their babies at this stage. They usually are hidden somewhere, but they're going up trees to feed. Here's another picture from the same day showing she does have one skill pretty well developed at day 2. Porcupines spend a lot of time scratching. I imagine it's pretty itchy to be a porcupine. So what do you say? That's a 2-day-old. More. That's a certain level of coordination anyway. So pretty soon an important discovery is made. There is something that can be sucked on that's warm and kind of fuzzy. It's just too bad milk doesn't come out of it. She discovered earlobes, and she just became an avid earlobe sucker. So finally, with donor earlobes, I managed to get her to transition from an earlobe to a bottle. I've been tube feeding her now for 2 weeks. And by the end of 2 weeks, she's finally drinking just from a bottle. But she has to have an earlobe nearby. Absolutely has to. And it stayed that way for at least a month and a half.
Do they usually just have a single?
Oh yeah, that's another interesting thing about porcupines. Just one baby, and it's called a porcupet. On, I think it was about June 6th, I received a very exciting phone call. I was just so excited. I won't even tell you the word I said when I heard my neighbor on the phone say, porcupine in our yard, I think it's Fretful. So I drove down there really fast, and I was so excited I couldn't hold the camera still. There was Fretful. Oh. He looked terrible. He was so skinny and he was shedding, but it was Fretful. And that night he was still in their yard, and I went back down to visit him with some friends that were coming over for dinner, and I took lots and lots of pictures of Fretful. He looked a little bit better in evening light. There's Isabel. And Fretful, and these 2 girls love Fretful. And he was very happy to see them. But you can see he's looking a little raggedy. But look look at all those nice green plants. Fretful was now in a position to have a nice summer. And Fretful met Dandelion for the first time that evening too. There was Dandelion climbing a tree, pretty good at climbing already. Thus began my two porcupines summer. Now yes, the earlobe. Oh. So Fretful and Dandelion were a little bit interested in each other. They would occasionally sniff noses, but pretty much ignored each other, or they would have this kind of interaction. Whoops, I turned the sound down. You may have to. Yeah, you get the idea. That was Dandelion. So Dandelion had a great summer of relaxing and growing and going and doing. And she continued to develop her skills at porcupine play. But, I mean, it looks really silly, but this is what they have to do, and you can see when they're in alert. All the way the quills flare up and leave that exposed patch in the back, with all the sharp little quills on it, but yeah, force to be reckoned with, Dandelion the Dreadful. Oh, she hung out in the goat pen a little bit because Fretful was down there eating milkweed, and oh, yep, there she is saying hello to the goat, and here she is saying hello to the goat. The goat's not too sure about this. So I'm watching all this. I'm assuming the goat's pretty smart. After all, Fretful's eating milkweed in her pasture every day, but then one day, down we go. She just couldn't resist. Dandelion finally discovered something she likes to eat. She really loved grapes. So I have to spend a lot of time outdoors with Dandelion because she's outgrowing her pen, but it is so hard to work with a porcupine. But she just doesn't want to leave you alone. That would go on for hours. I got so I could tolerate it to some extent, but finally she'd go to sleep. That was good. Finally she'd go to sleep. She would also maybe leave for a little while to do some climbing, and I want you to notice here the role the tail plays in going up that tree. The underside of a porcupine's tail, how many of you felt the underside of a porcupine's tail? It had these really stiff bristles and very muscular, and if it was longer, it would be considered prehensile. She definitely uses it the way anyone would use a limb. Oh, what, more of this? Oh dear, yes, still playing.
I think I should call this dancing.
Dancing, that's what we call it, the dandelion dance. Oh, she's dreadful.
She looks like a butterfly.
It's exactly like a butterfly. Tell her you said that.
You can use quills for painting.
So Fretful had a wonderful summer, eating milkweed in the goat pasture, and then grooming. He's sharpening his fingernails there, his claws. And he and Dandelion gradually start spending more time together. This was a particularly interesting interaction because Fretful was making some funny noises, and she followed him out into the woods. And I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this noise Fretful makes when she goes back over there. Come on, Dandelion, let's speed this up. He's making this noise. Anyway, he decides, I'll just lie down and go to sleep, and that was enough. But they are really starting to hang around together a little bit. Dandelion follows him up into trees sometimes, not very often. But she's gradually learning how to be a porcupine. Oh, but, you know, if you want to think they're getting cozy and friendly. Not so much. Poor Fretful. So one day in September, I go out into the mudroom and there are two baby porcupines. Actually, Dandelion wasn't there at the time. I had to go find her. There was this other little porcupine here. And I say, oh, okay, there's some more, a little bit more data for my theory that dispersing baby porcupines are attracted to places where there's lots of other porcupines then, like in my mudroom. So Dandelion ignored this little porcupine. I think that they knew each other. I think they spent time outside together a lot. Well, maybe not a lot, but occasionally. So, I'm starting, it's now September, and I'm worrying about my porcupine friends as summer draws to a close. I figure, okay, Dandelion is going to disperse soon. And according to Aldous Rose in the Catskills, female porcupettes leave their natal territory. So they may travel a few miles and then settle down somewhere. And so what's she going to do? She's going to go 3 miles and find some nice house with some people who have no idea what's going on and go over to them and say, hey, got any milk? She's still drinking from a bottle. So. And yeah, so I'm worried about what she's going to do. And of course I'm worried about this old guy. I don't know how he's going to survive another winter with his worn out teeth. And besides, now that it's September, Big East is going to return to his den site any day, and then Fretful is going to get the boot. And I may not even be able to find him to offer him any support through the winter. He'd been in the habit of just sleeping around in the area around the house, in the trees and bushes out there. But that night he headed back to his old den site. And he usually goes down through the woods to the west, but that night he must have gone up to the east and crossed the road to get to his old den site. And my neighbor called, no, she stopped by the next morning and said, oh, Fretful's been hit by a car. So, yeah, that was a very shocking and sad day. And unfortunately, fortunately it turns out I had to get to work to get ready for an event that was coming up, so I had to muscle through the day and got home late after dark and had to decided I would deal with Fretful right then because I didn't want to deal with a porcupine corpse the next day, so I took him down into the woods next to his milkweed patch and dug a hole, and I'm going to read to you what I wrote in my column. I think probably a few of you have read it, but let's see. Just because I was thinking, oh, I'm exhausted, I really don't want to do this tonight. Oh, Fretful, it was just so sad that I wasn't really expecting anything but to get the job done. So, let me flip through here. Oh, yeah. That night, I dug a depression in the soft pine duff at the edge of Fretful's milkweed meadow, and there settled his mortal remains. It was a gorgeous night. The Milky Way blazed a path overhead, and I lay down in the grass to take in the dazzle of it all. And I don't say this in the article, but it was in the same place where Fretful and I had that first magical meeting, where he came out of the woods and put his paw on my shoulder. So I lay down in that spot again, not really thinking about it. And usually such universal contemplation makes me feel smaller than tiny, an insignificant dust mote. That night, however, I had a different experience. Where else, I wondered, in all of the vastness of space, might such disparate creatures as people and porcupines form such attachments? Even if the correct answer is that such lives and loves had evolved in countless places throughout the universe, I couldn't help but feel like a bigger part of it that night. Thank you, Fretful. And it's a good thing I still had this little monster to distract me. But of course I was now doubly worried about Dandelion, because the nearest places aside from my house where there are porcupine scents that she might move off to, or across the road up in the ledges where Big East lives. And also that night, or a couple nights later, I went out and my gosh, there's a big porcupine sitting in Fretful's spot eating an apple. I really thought for just a second that there had been some terrible mistake. But no, it was Big East. But I noticed, so indeed, Fretful's time at my house was probably close to an end anyway. I noticed as Big East turned and scuttled away that his quills were not black and white underneath all that black fur, but brown and white, the same color as Fretful. Fretful was an unusually colored porcupine. In this region anyway, most of them are black and white. So I now realize that Fretful and Big East are almost certainly related, and Fretful may well be Big East's father. So that was interesting. Now he goes on. So Dandelion did indeed, that's an ugly picture, so we'll talk here for a minute, start to become very, very, very interested in heading up toward the road and going up to the ledges where Big East and now the little porcupine were both living. So I strung up a fence to deter her and took her for a walk in the other direction with a goat. And the day after I did that, she moved down there on her own. So there's an old log dump down there, and see these very nice porcupine accommodations here. She moved right into both of those spots, and I went down to visit her yesterday. She's been staying down there on her own for the past month. And here she comes now up through the woods, grown up porcupine. I was so proud of her. I was so proud of her.
Oh.
Grown up porcupine, looking for her bottle. But not that interested in her bottle, because she's a little bit more interested in just climbing up a little higher. Just a little bit higher. Oh, I like the lap better. That's good. Oh, that's the lap. And then I'll finish the bottle. So there she is. Dandelion also now seems to be worried about strange people that she encounters unexpectedly. So I think she is going to do just fine out there in the wilderness. And the reason I keep giving her a bottle is hoping that she will stay nearby for the winter. This is what some moose rehabilitators I know about do up in Canada. They keep feeding their little moose cows, their gigantic moose cows, a bottle of milk a day all winter just so they can stay in the neighborhood. So here, we're going to end with this final image of Fretful and Dandelion, the dear friends, eating together. Dandelion's got her grapes, Fretful has an apple, and it really captures their personalities. Any porcupine questions? Yeah.
How'd you get Fretful on a scale?
Oh, he just was interested in exploring and So he was climbing around on things, and he's put it in the place he's likely to climb, and, yeah.
Did you pick him up?
Not Fretful, but he would sometimes climb on my lap. Yeah, I know, but Dandelion I had to pick up a lot, and when she doesn't want to go somewhere and you try and pick her up, oh, you should hear the cussing. Oh, very intimidating. Yes?
I thought that they were rodents and would thus grow their teeth back.
Oh, only the front teeth. The
Uh-huh.
incisors continue to grow, but the molars don't. So,
Okay.
yeah, that's what got worn down.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd encourage you to keep writing the articles for the papers. They're just great to read and very enjoyable.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We look forward to it every week.
Oh, every month. You may look forward to it.
Every Saturday.
You may look forward to it, but I only write them once a month.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any last?
I found they're talking very interesting. I'd never heard.
Well,
until
they've
I
got
read
a
your
lot
article,
to
and then
say.
I found, they're talking, but have you found any, do they have a range of little signals or things that they say to each other, like birds and other animals?
Yeah, the greeting, and I can
Communicate
kind
with
of
them.
imitate some of these things. I'm spending lots of time with a very talkative porcupine. I'll do my best. So the greeting sound they make is, and they make that noise if they're following you too. And Dandelion is just getting closer and closer to your earlobe. If they're unhappy, it's kind of barky, screechy noises. You can kind of hear Dandelion doing that. And if they really, really want you to stay away, and this is the noise people hear in the woods and they think, this is a fisher screaming or something dying. But they always end up with a little porcupine talks at the end, so they're whining.
Wow.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.